Did you serve my mother rotten food because she's blind? Sweetie, that's what people like you eat. Look at me. You will respect the black people. Those words hung in the air like a noose. The entire first-class cabin fell silent as passengers turned to stare at a 9-year-old black girl who had just delivered what sounded like the most impossible threat in aviation history. The plane hit turbulence at exactly the moment Nia Calder decided she'd had enough. Atlas Air Flight 619 shuddered through a pocket of rough air at 35,000 feet. But the 9-year-old girl standing in the first-class aisle didn't flinch. Her small frame swayed with the motion, her hands steady on the seat back beside her. Her eyes locked on the flight attendant who'd just placed a meal tray in front of her mother with barely concealed contempt. "Excuse me." Nia's voice cut through the cabin noise with unexpected clarity. Not loud, not shrill, just crystalline and impossible to ignore. "This food is rotten. I need you to take this back." Lauren Beckett turned slowly, her perfectly applied smile freezing into something brittle and dangerous. She was 34, blonde, impeccably groomed, with the kind of polished presentation that suggested years of knowing exactly how to use her appearance as both weapon and shield. Her eyes swept over Nia with the dismissive efficiency of someone cataloging an inconvenience. "Sweetie, that's what people like you eat." The word sweetie dripped with condescension thick enough to choke on. "Please sit down. You're blocking the aisle. This food is spoiled." Nia didn't move. "And look at me. You will respect the black people." Several passengers' heads turned now, the universal human instinct to witness confrontation overriding the social contract of pretending not to notice. A businessman in 2A lowered his journal. A woman across the aisle paused mid-scroll on her phone. The cabin's ambient noise seemed to drop several decibels as people unconsciously leaned in to hear better. Lauren's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The food is perfectly fine. Now sit down before I have to speak with your mother about your behavior." "My mother can't see the food." Nia's words landed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Did you serve my mother rotten food because she's blind? How dare you serve her something you'd never serve anyone else?" The air in first class went absolutely still. Even the engine noise seemed to fade into background irrelevance as every passenger within earshot absorbed what had just been said. Lauren's face cycled through shock, anger, and calculation in the space of 2 heartbeats. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "How dare you accuse me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything." Nia's voice remained level, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. "I'm telling you what happened. You gave my mother spoiled food because you assumed she wouldn't know. But I can see it. I can smell it. And now everyone else can too." She gestured to the tray sitting in front of her mother, Dr. Nia Calder, who sat motionless in seat 3B, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed in a mask of careful neutrality that spoke volumes to anyone who knew how to read it. The meal in question was a pasta dish with what should have been white sauce but had taken on a yellowish tinge, the vegetables showing signs of oxidation. The whole thing emanating a faint sour smell that became impossible to ignore once attention was drawn to it. A woman in the row behind leaned forward, her nose wrinkling. "Oh my God! You can smell it from here." The businessman in 2A stood up, moving into the aisle to get a better view. His expression shifted from curiosity to disgust. "That's not okay. That's really not okay." Lauren's composure cracked visibly. Red blotches appeared on her neck, creeping up toward her jawline. "This is absurd. The food is prepared according to strict guidelines. If there's an issue with temperature or appearance, that's catering, not me. Then why did everyone else get fresh meals? Nia's question hung in the air like smoke. The gentleman in 1A got his 15 minutes ago, and his pasta was white. The lady in 2C got hers 10 minutes ago, and her vegetables were bright green. My mother's tray was sitting in the galley getting worse while you served everyone else first. I watched you do it. The observation landed with the weight of irrefutable evidence. Several passengers nodded slowly, memory catching up with the pattern they hadn't consciously registered until this moment. Lauren had indeed moved through the cabin in a specific order, her warmth and efficiency distributed unevenly, certain passengers receiving immediate attention while others waited. I have a service order I follow, Lauren started, but her voice had lost its authoritative edge. You have a pattern. Nia pulled her phone from her pocket with deliberate slowness. The movement was theatrical enough that multiple passengers immediately understood its significance. A pattern of who gets served first, who gets smiled at, who gets ignored. A pattern of my mother's call button being pressed 3 times before you came over. A pattern of you telling her the overhead bin was full when it wasn't, so her bag had to go 6 rows back. A pattern that I've been documenting since we boarded in Atlanta 2 hours ago. If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel. The cabin had transformed into a courtroom, with Nia as both prosecutor and judge, her measured tone and careful evidence more damning than any amount of emotional outburst could have been. Lauren's face had gone from red to white, the reality of her situation beginning to penetrate the protective layers of denial and professional authority she'd wrapped around herself. You're 9 years old. Lauren's voice came out strangled, grasping at the only power differential she could still claim. You don't understand how airline service works. You're making assumptions based on... I'm 9 years old, Nia agreed, cutting her off with surgical precision. Which means I still notice when adults think they can get away with being cruel because the person they're being cruel to can't see it happening. My mother taught me to pay attention to patterns. She taught me that silence protects people who do wrong things. She taught me that speaking up isn't rude, it's necessary. She paused, letting the words settle, then added with devastating calm. She also taught me exactly how the airline industry works. Every regulation, every policy, every legal requirement about equal service and accommodation. Because before her accident, my mother wrote those policies. She helped create the framework that's supposed to protect passengers from exactly what you just did. Lauren's face underwent a transformation that would have been fascinating if it weren't so catastrophic to witness. The blood drained from her cheeks so rapidly she looked almost gray under the cabin's LED lighting. Her lips parted, closed, parted again like a fish gulping for oxygen it couldn't find. Her hands, which had been planted confidently on her hips in a posture of authority, now hung uselessly at her sides. I don't know what you're implying, but I've been nothing but professional. The words came out defensive and thin, the tone of someone who knows they've already lost but hasn't accepted it yet. You've been discriminatory. Nia's correction was gentle, almost kind, which made it cut deeper than any accusation shouted in anger could have. And the difference matters, because one is a mistake and the other is a choice. You chose who deserved fresh food and who didn't. You chose who deserved a smile and who got a sigh. You chose to make my mother feel small in a space where she paid the same fare as everyone else. Dr. Nia Calder finally moved, her hand reaching out to touch her daughter's arm. Her fingers found Nia's wrist with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to navigate the world through touch and sound rather than sight. Baby, it's okay. Let it go. Her voice was soft, careful. The voice of a woman who'd spent years learning that battles weren't always worth the cost of fighting them. But there was something else underneath the resignation, something that trembled just beneath the surface. Not weakness, exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of having to decide, again and again, whether this indignity was worth the energy of resistance. "It's not okay, Mama." Nia didn't raise her voice, but her conviction filled the cabin like a physical presence. "You always tell me that when something's wrong, staying quiet makes us part of the problem. You tell me that dignity isn't something people give us. It's something we carry with us and refuse to surrender. You tell me these things, and then you ask me to let it go when someone treats you like you don't matter." Althea's composure wavered, her jaw clenched, her throat working as she swallowed hard against emotions she'd been containing since Atlanta. Since before Atlanta. Since the years of navigating a world that had decided her blindness made her less worthy of consideration, less deserving of basic respect, less human in ways both subtle and devastating. "Sometimes we have to choose our battles, sweetheart." Her words were measured, but her voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying the cost of all those unchosen battles, all those moments of swallowed pride and accepted disrespect. "Then I'm choosing this one." Nia's fingers closed around her mother's hand. "Because you won't. Because someone taught you that fighting back causes more problems than it solves. Because the world made you tired, and I'm not tired yet." The businessman in 2A, whose name tag identified him as Douglas Morrison, stepped fully into the aisle. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His voice carried the boom of boardrooms and country clubs. "Young lady, I've been flying for 40 years. I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen a child have to defend her parent from discrimination at 35,000 feet. This is disgraceful. Sir, with all due respect, you don't understand the full context." Lauren attempted, but Morrison cut her off with a raised hand that brooked no argument. "I understand that I watched you serve my meal with a smile and a warm towel while you practically threw a tray at this woman. I understand that my call button gets answered in 30 seconds while hers took 10 minutes. I understand that I'm white and male and seated in 2A, and that seems to be the only context that matters in your service model." A murmur rippled through the cabin, passengers shifting in their seats, some nodding, others pulling out phones. The woman who'd commented on the smell earlier stood up, her expression set with righteous anger. "I have the whole interaction recorded. From the moment you brought the tray to now. Everything." Lauren's eyes darted to the phone, then to the other phones now visible throughout first class. A constellation of recording devices capturing every word, every expression, every damning second of her unraveling authority. Her training kicked in, the customer service protocols designed for de-escalation, but her voice shook when she spoke. "I'm going to have to ask everyone to put away their recording devices. There are privacy regulations. There are anti-discrimination regulations too." This came from a younger woman in 4C, her voice sharp with the particular anger of someone who'd experienced similar treatment and never had the platform to confront it. "And unlike your privacy concerns, those regulations actually protect passengers from exactly what we just witnessed. I'm calling the purser." Lauren's retreat into hierarchy was predictable, the last refuge of authority challenged. She reached for the call button near the galley, her movements jerky with poorly contained panic. "Good." Nia's single word stopped her mid-reach. "Call everyone. Call the captain. Call corporate. Because I want to make sure that what happened here gets documented by as many people as possible, through as many official channels as exist." There was something in the way she said it that made Lauren hesitate, some quality in the child's voice that suggested this wasn't bravado or childish defiance, but something far more calculated and dangerous. Nia stood there in the aisle, all 4 feet 7 inches of her, wearing a navy dress with a white collar that her grandmother had made, a silver bracelet on her wrist that had belonged to her father, and an expression of absolute certainty that made her seem ancient despite her 9 years. "Who are you?" Lauren's question came out as barely more than a whisper.
"I'm Nia Calder."
She said it simply, without emphasis, as if the name should be self-explanatory. "And this is my mother, Dr. Nia Calder." The name hung in the air for 3 seconds before recognition began to dawn in various passengers' faces. The businessman in 2A went absolutely still, his eyes widening. The woman in 4C gasped softly. Several other passengers leaned forward, suddenly paying far more acute attention than the situation had warranted even moments before. "Nia Calder." Morrison repeated the name slowly, his tone shifting from supportive outrage to something approaching awe. "The Nia Calder? Skybridge Regional Airways." Althea's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle straightening of her spine that suggested she was both resigned to and uncomfortable with wherever this revelation was heading. "My mother founded Skybridge Regional," Nia confirmed, her voice steady. "She built it from 2 planes and a dream into a carrier that serves 43 cities across the eastern seaboard. She pioneered the first comprehensive accessibility standards in regional aviation. She testified before Congress on disability accommodation requirements. She wrote the training manual that most carriers, including Atlas Air, adapted for their own disability sensitivity protocols." Lauren's face had progressed beyond pale into something resembling ash. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her brain clearly struggling to process the magnitude of her mistake. She just served spoiled food to a woman who didn't just understand the airline industry, but had literally helped shape its regulatory framework. She'd discriminated against someone who'd made a career of fighting discrimination. She dismissed and demeaned a passenger who had more power and influence in aviation than Lauren would accumulate in 10 lifetimes. "That's impossible." The words escaped Lauren's mouth before she could stop them, denial overriding common sense. "Dr. Calder doesn't fly commercial. She retired years ago after." She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to reference the accident, the tragedy that had cost Nia her sight and nearly her life. If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel. "After the crash." Nia's voice cut through the tension like a blade, reclaiming the narrative before Lauren could weaponize it. "You can say it. 6 years ago, a maintenance error on one of my own planes caused a cabin depressurization that killed 3 passengers and left me blind. I stepped back from daily operations because navigating board meetings and investor calls became complicated when I couldn't read their faces, couldn't see the subtle power plays, couldn't function in a world designed for sighted executives." Her voice was steady, factual, but underneath ran a current of steel that made it clear this wasn't shame she was expressing but defiance. "I've been living quietly in Charleston, maintaining majority ownership but letting my partner run operations. But silence and invisibility aren't the same thing, Ms. Beckett. I still own 62% of Skybridge. I still sit on the advisory board for the National Aviation Safety Commission. And I'm still connected to every major player in this industry through 3 decades of relationships that don't disappear just because I can't see." The cabin had gone so quiet that the sound of the air circulation system seemed thunderous. Passengers who'd been peripherally interested were now completely absorbed, witnessing what was rapidly becoming less a customer service dispute and more a corporate reckoning at altitude. I didn't know. Lauren's voice was barely audible, the last gasps of a defense that had already drowned. I swear I didn't know who you were. That's the problem. Morrison's voice cut in, sharp with disgust. You didn't need to know who she was. You needed to treat her like a human being regardless of her name or her influence or her ability to see. That's the baseline. That's the absolute minimum requirement of your job. I treat all passengers with respect. Lauren tried again, but the woman in 4C interrupted with a bitter laugh. You treat passengers who look like you with respect. The rest of us get whatever version of service you feel like providing that day. I've been watching you since boarding. The elderly Asian couple in row 5? You didn't offer them headphones until they asked twice. The black gentleman in row 7? You told him the overhead was full when there was clearly space. It's not about Dr. Calder specifically. It's about a pattern of behavior that you've gotten comfortable with because nobody calls it out. Nia's grip on her mother's hand tightened. That's why I'm not letting it go, Mama. Because it's not just about you. It's about everyone who gets treated like they're invisible or inconvenient. It's about all the times you told yourself it wasn't worth the fight. All the indignities you swallowed to avoid being labeled difficult or oversensitive or angry. Althea's face crumpled slightly, tears gathering behind the dark glasses she wore to hide eyes that no longer tracked movement or light. Baby, you don't understand what it costs to fight. Every single time. The energy it takes, the emotional toll, the way people look at you afterward like you're the problem for pointing out the problem. I do understand. Nia's voice softened but lost none of its conviction. I understand that fighting is exhausting. I understand that sometimes you just want to eat your terrible meal and get to your destination and pretend the disrespect didn't happen. I understand that you've been doing that for 6 years because the world made you feel like your disability was something to apologize for instead of something to accommodate. She turned back to Lauren, who stood frozen like a defendant awaiting sentencing. But I also understand that my mother is flying to Redwood Medical Institute today for a consultation about a new surgical procedure that might restore her vision. That she's been preparing for this for 8 months. Following a strict diet and medication regimen that could be compromised by consuming spoiled food. That this flight isn't just inconvenient for her. It's critical. And you decided, based on nothing but your own prejudice, that she didn't deserve the same standard of service as everyone else. The revelation of why they were flying, the vulnerability of hope underlying this journey, added another layer of cruelty to Lauren's actions. Several passengers made soft sounds of dismay. Morrison shook his head slowly, his expression darkening further. You could have jeopardized her surgery. His words landed like an indictment. Not just insulted her, actually harmed her. Lauren's legs seemed to give out slightly. She reached for the galley entrance to steady herself, her face now streaked with tears that she tried unsuccessfully to hide. I didn't mean. I never intended. Intent doesn't erase impact. The quiet voice came from an unexpected source. A young black woman in row 6 stood up, her flight attendant uniform identifying her as crew, though clearly not working this particular flight. Her name tag read Crystal Hayes. I'm deadheading home after a shift. I've been watching this whole interaction, and I need to say something as someone who works in this industry. She looked directly at Lauren with an expression that mixed disappointment and recognition. I've worked with people like you. People who aren't overtly hateful, who would never use slurs or make explicitly racist comments, but who've internalized a hierarchy that determines who deserves warmth and who deserves coldness. It's insidious because you probably don't even realize you're doing it half the time. You've just absorbed the message that some passengers are more valuable than others, and you perform accordingly. Crystal turned to address the cabin at large. But here's what makes this particularly egregious. Flight attendants have massive power at altitude. We control access to food, water, medical supplies, emergency equipment. We can make a 12-hour flight pleasant or torturous based on how we choose to wield that power. When that power gets filtered through bias, it becomes dangerous. What happened here wasn't just rude. It was an abuse of authority in an environment where passengers have almost no recourse. Lauren was openly sobbing now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. I've worked for Atlas for 9 years. I've never had a complaint. I'm not a bad person. Nobody thinks they're a bad person. Althea spoke for the first time since revealing her identity, her voice carrying a weariness that suggested she'd had this conversation in various forms too many times to count. But good people do harmful things when they're operating on unchecked assumptions and unexamined prejudices. The question isn't whether you're inherently bad. The question is whether you're willing to acknowledge the harm you've caused and genuinely work to change. The galley call button chimed with sharp insistence, breaking the tableau that had frozen first class into a museum exhibit of confrontation and consequence. Lauren flinched at the sound like it was a gunshot. She reached for the handset with trembling fingers, her movements mechanical, someone going through motions while their mind processed catastrophe. First class galley. Her voice cracked halfway through the greeting. Whatever was said on the other end made her face lose what little color had remained. She nodded repeatedly to words only she could hear, her free hand pressed against her mouth as if physically holding back the breakdown threatening to escape. When she hung up, she looked like someone who just received news of a death in the family. The purser is coming forward. The words emerged flat and defeated. And the captain has been notified of an incident requiring documentation. Good. Nia's single syllable carried finality. She pulled her phone up again, fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the screen. I'm also emailing the video documentation to Atlas Air's Customer Relations Department, their Diversity and Inclusion Office, and the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. I have all the addresses because my mother made me memorize them when I was 7. She said knowledge is protection. Morrison let out a low whistle of appreciation. You've been preparing for this conversation your whole life, haven't you? Not this conversation specifically. Nia's attention remained focused on her phone as she typed. But my mother taught me that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you accept the underestimation. People see a 9-year-old and think I don't understand how power works, how systems function, how to document evidence and build a case. They're wrong. The purser arrived before Lauren could formulate a response. Daniel Cross was 53, African American, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating the complex social dynamics of airline service. He stepped into first class with the controlled urgency of a paramedic arriving at an accident scene, his eyes sweeping the cabin to assess the situation before anyone spoke. I'm Daniel Cross, senior purser on this flight. His voice carried authority without aggression. I understand there's been a service issue that requires my attention. A service issue. The woman in 4C repeated his euphemism with bitter amusement. That's one way to describe serving spoiled food to a blind passenger while providing fresh meals to everyone else. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. I'd like to hear from all parties before drawing conclusions. Ms. Beckett, can you walk me through what occurred? Lauren opened her mouth, but only a choked sound emerged. Tears were streaming freely now, leaving tracks through her foundation, her mascara creating dark smudges beneath her eyes. She looked wrecked, destroyed, someone watching their entire professional life collapse in real time. I served the vegetarian meal option to the passenger in 3B as requested. Her voice was barely audible. The child became confrontational about the quality of the food and has made accusations that I discriminated based on the passenger's disability. Accusations. Nia's repetition of the word was scalpel sharp. As if multiple witnesses and video documentation constitute accusations rather than evidence. Daniel's eyes shifted to Nia, and something in his expression changed. Recognition flickered across his features, though whether he recognized her, her mother, or simply the situation's gravity was unclear. Young lady, I appreciate your advocacy for your mother, but I need to conduct this inquiry professionally. That means hearing from the passenger herself. He turned to Althea with visible respect in his posture. Ma'am, can you tell me in your own words what you experienced? If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel. Althea sat very still for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her face angled slightly away from Daniel's voice in the unconscious habit of someone who'd learned that direct eye contact was expected but impossible. When she spoke, her voice carried the careful control of someone choosing between dignity and truth. I boarded this flight with my daughter at Gate B-17 in Atlanta. From the moment we entered the aircraft, the service we received was measurably different from that provided to other first-class passengers. My carry-on bag was removed from the overhead bin and taken to row 9 despite available space. My call button was answered significantly slower than those of surrounding passengers. When meal service began, I was served last despite being in row 3. And the food I received was visibly and olfactorily compromised in ways that the meals served to other passengers were not. Her recitation was clinical, factual, stripped of emotional color. It was the voice of someone who'd learned to report discrimination like a scientist documenting observations, removing herself from the equation to avoid accusations of oversensitivity or imagination. Additionally, she continued, when my daughter attempted to address these concerns, she was dismissed, talked down to, and ultimately threatened with consequences for my behavior. That threat, specifically, crosses from poor service into something more troubling. Using a child's concern for her parents' well-being as leverage to enforce compliance is manipulative at best and abusive at worst. Daniel's expression had grown progressively more grave as Althea spoke. He pulled a tablet from his jacket pocket and began taking notes with swift, economical movements. Were there any verbal exchanges that you found particularly concerning? Ms. Beckett suggested that I misunderstood airline food quality. Althea's tone remained even, but steel threaded through her words now. Given that I cannot see the food, the implication was clear. She assumed my disability made me an unreliable witness to my own experience. That's not what I meant. Lauren's protest emerged desperate and thin. I was just trying to explain that airline catering doesn't always look appetizing, even when it's perfectly safe. The food was not safe. Morrison's interruption was sharp. I saw it. I smelled it. That pasta had been sitting unrefrigerated long enough to develop bacterial growth visible to the naked eye. If she'd eaten that and gotten food poisoning, it could have compromised her medical procedure. You didn't just insult her. You endangered her. Daniel made another note on his tablet, his stylus moving with deliberate precision. Mr. Morrison. Douglas Morrison. I'm in 2A. Mr. Morrison, did you witness the entire interaction from the beginning? From the moment Ms. Beckett brought the meal tray. I saw her place it in front of Dr. Calder without the explanation or presentation she'd given to other passengers. I saw the child immediately identify a problem that I, frankly, should have noticed myself. And I watched as Ms. Beckett became increasingly defensive rather than addressing the legitimate concern raised. I have video. The woman from 4C held up her phone. 4 minutes and 37 seconds covering from when the tray was delivered through approximately 90 seconds ago. I can airdrop it to you right now if you provide your device information. Daniel's thumb moved to his tablet. Please do. I'll also need statements from anyone else who witnessed relevant portions of the interaction. Hands went up throughout first class. 7 passengers, then 9, then 12. Daniel's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching alarm as he realized the scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't a he said she said dispute that could be quietly managed and buried in paperwork. This was a documented incident with multiple witnesses, video evidence, and a passenger whose name carried weight that could crush careers and damage corporate reputations. Ms. Beckett, I'm going to need you to step into the rear galley while I complete initial interviews. Daniel's voice remained measured, but the underlying message was clear. This was removal disguised as procedural courtesy. Please don't speak with any passengers or crew members until I've completed my assessment. Lauren looked like she might argue, but whatever protest lived in her throat died before reaching her lips. She nodded mutely and shuffled toward the rear of the cabin, her movements those of a prisoner walking toward execution. Passengers watched her pass with expressions ranging from sympathy to satisfaction to careful neutrality. Crystal Hayes, the off-duty flight attendant, caught Daniel's attention. Sir, I'd like to provide a statement as well. I'm crew for SkyWest, but I observed the entire incident as a passenger. Your industry perspective would be valuable. Daniel made another note. I'll speak with you after I've gathered basic accounts from the immediately surrounding passengers. He spent the next 20 minutes moving through first class with methodical efficiency, collecting statements, receiving airdrop videos, documenting timestamps and observations. Nia watched him work with the focused attention of someone studying technique for future application. She noticed how he asked open-ended questions, how he let people finish their thoughts without interruption, how he carefully noted not just what people said but how they said it. When Daniel finally returned to row 3, he lowered himself into the aisle seat across from Althea with visible weariness. Up close, the lines around his eyes spoke of decades spent managing the impossible task of keeping passengers happy, crew motivated, and corporate overlords satisfied while navigating the racial and social dynamics that made service work a minefield for black professionals. Dr. Calder. His voice carried recognition now, the formality of someone addressing an equal rather than simply a passenger. I need to tell you something off the record before I tell you something on the record. Althea tilted her head slightly, the gesture she used to indicate attention when she couldn't provide eye contact.
I'm listening.
Off the record, I know who you are. I attended your keynote speech at the Regional Airlines Association conference in 2015. You talked about how accessibility isn't a favor we extend to disabled passengers but a legal and moral obligation we fulfill for all passengers. That speech changed how I trained my crews. It changed how I thought about my job. His voice carried genuine reverence mixed with profound embarrassment, which makes what happened today on my aircraft even more unacceptable. You were failed by someone working under my supervision, in a cabin under my responsibility, while traveling on an airline that has repeatedly pledged commitment to the standards you helped create. Althea's composure wavered. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard against emotion. "Mr. Cross. Daniel, please. Daniel." She tested his name, giving it weight. What happened today wasn't unique to this flight or this airline or this particular flight attendant. It's systemic. It's the water we swim in, so constant that most people don't even notice they're drowning us. She reached up to adjust her dark glasses, a nervous gesture that revealed the vulnerability underneath her composed exterior. "I've flown commercial exactly 4 times since my accident. Each time, I've experienced some variation of what happened today. Different specifics, same underlying message. Your disability makes you less deserving of basic consideration. I stopped flying for 2 years because the cumulative weight of those indignities became heavier than my need to travel." "Then why today?" Daniel asked gently. "If flying has become so difficult, why subject yourself to it now?" "Because I'm not dead yet." The words came out fierce, surprising everyone including Althea herself. "Because there's a surgeon in Redwood who's pioneered a technique that might restore partial vision to patients with my specific injury pattern. Because my daughter is 9 years old and I've missed 6 years of seeing her face, watching her grow, witnessing her become this extraordinary human being who's braver than I've managed to be." Tears escaped from beneath her glasses, tracking down her cheeks. "Because I got tired of hiding. Tired of making myself smaller to avoid confrontation. Tired of teaching my daughter through my own surrender that sometimes dignity is too expensive to afford." Nia's hand found her mother's, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of a connection maintained through years of navigating a world that tried constantly to separate them. "Mama, you didn't surrender. You survived. That's different." "Is it?" Althea's question was directed as much inward as outward. "Because from where I'm sitting, survival that requires constant compromise of self feels an awful lot like slow-motion surrender." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his tablet forgotten in his lap, his professional detachment cracking to reveal the human underneath. "For what it's worth, Dr. Calder, I understand that tension. Every Black professional understands it. The calculation we make every day about which battles to fight, which indignities to swallow, which version of ourselves is safe to bring into predominantly white spaces." He straightened, rebuilding his professional demeanor like armor. "But here's what I can tell you on the record. What happened today violated multiple company policies and federal regulations. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires airlines to provide equivalent service to passengers with disabilities. Serving you compromised food while providing fresh meals to other passengers is discriminatory service delivery. The documentation is extensive, the witness testimony is consistent, and the video evidence is damning." His fingers moved across his tablet with decisive swipes. "I'm filing an immediate incident report with our corporate office, the FAA, and our Diversity Compliance Department. Ms. Beckett is being suspended from duty effective immediately, pending a full investigation. You'll receive a formal written apology from Atlas Air's executive team, full compensation for your tickets, and I'm personally recommending that our CEO meet with you to discuss system-wide improvements to our accessibility training and service protocols." Morrison leaned forward from his seat. "That's a start, but it's not enough. Dr. Calder's experience suggests this isn't an isolated incident but a pattern problem. What's Atlas doing to audit how disabled passengers are treated across all flights, all crews, all airports? That's above my authority to promise." Daniel met Morrison's gaze steadily. But I can guarantee that this incident will be escalated to the highest levels of our organization. Dr. Calder's name carries significant weight in this industry. When word spreads that she was treated this way on our aircraft, the reputational and regulatory consequences will be severe enough to force meaningful change. So change happens because my mother is powerful enough to hurt the company's reputation? Nia's question cut through the practical discussion like a blade. What about all the disabled passengers who don't have influence, who don't have industry connections, who experience the same discrimination but lack the platform to make anyone care? The question hung in the first-class cabin like an accusation none of the adults could comfortably answer. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Morrison looked away, discomfort flickering across his privileged features. Even Althea seemed momentarily silenced by her daughter's moral clarity. Crystal Hayes rose from her seat in row 6 and moved forward, her off-duty status somehow making her courage more pronounced. The kid's right. We implement changes after high-profile incidents because embarrassment motivates action faster than ethics. I've filed 17 reports about discriminatory behavior I've witnessed from colleagues in the past 3 years. You know how many resulted in meaningful consequences? 2. And both of those involved passengers who threatened legal action with lawyers on retainer. She looked directly at Nia with something approaching awe. You're 9 years old and you've already figured out what took me 15 years in this industry to accept. The system protects itself first, passengers second, and vulnerable passengers only when ignoring them becomes more expensive than helping them. Let me ask you this. Would you have stood up? Would you have risked everything for a complete stranger? Give us a like if we've got your attention so far. Comment where you're watching us from because we'd love to know the amazing people that watch this. You can also subscribe if you want to be the kind of person who would. Now let's continue. That's an unfair characterization, Daniel began, but Crystal cut him off with a sharp gesture. Is it? Be honest, Daniel. If Dr. Calder had been Martha Johnson from Topeka, retired schoolteacher traveling alone, no industry connections, no platform, no ability to generate negative press, would this response be the same? Would you be filing reports with the FAA and promising executive meetings? Or would you offer her some bonus miles, comp her ticket, and quietly remind the flight attendant to be more careful next time? The silence that followed was answer enough. Daniel's jaw worked as he struggled with the truth of Crystal's words, wanting to defend an industry he'd spent 3 decades serving while unable to deny the accuracy of her assessment. You're right. His admission came quietly but carried the weight of genuine acknowledgement. The system is designed to minimize liability and manage public relations, not to ensure equity. And passengers with power get better outcomes than passengers without it. That's not theoretical. That's documented reality backed by complaint resolution data that shows profound disparities based on race, disability status, and perceived socio-economic class. He turned back to Nia and Althea. But here's what I can promise within my sphere of influence. I'm going to use this incident as a wedge. I'm going to push for mandatory bias training that isn't just checking a corporate compliance box. I'm going to advocate for anonymous passenger surveys specifically focused on service quality disparities. And I'm going to keep pushing until Atlas either implements meaningful changes or fires me for being inconvenient. They won't fire you. Morrison's voice carried the certainty of someone who understood corporate calculation. You're black, senior, well-credentialed, and you've just perfectly documented your response to a discrimination incident. Firing you would create exactly the kind of attention they're trying to avoid. You've got leverage now. Use it. Nia's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening slightly. The video has been shared 43,000 times in the past 18 minutes. It's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Someone created a hashtag justice at 35,000. Lord have mercy. Daniel's head dropped into his hands. This is going to be national news before we land. Good. Althea's single word carried steel. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and this industry has been operating in shadows for too long. Every disabled passenger who's been dismissed, patronized, or discriminated against deserves to see that their experiences weren't isolated incidents or personal failings, but symptoms of systemic problems. The intercom crackled to life, the captain's voice filling the cabin with authoritative calm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. I've been made aware of a serious service incident in first class. I want to state unequivocally that the behavior described in reports I've received does not reflect the values of this airline or this crew. We will be conducting a full investigation, and appropriate actions will be taken. To the passenger who was affected, please accept my personal apology and assurance that your concerns are being taken with utmost seriousness. The announcement was professional, appropriate, and utterly insufficient given the magnitude of what had occurred. But it was also public acknowledgement from the highest authority on the aircraft, creating an official record that couldn't be quietly buried or dismissed as misunderstanding. Lauren emerged briefly from the rear galley, escorted by another flight attendant. Her face was blotchy from crying, her uniform disheveled, her entire demeanor that of someone in shock. She didn't look at anyone as she was guided to a crew rest area, removed from passenger view but not yet removed from the aircraft. What happens to her now? Nia asked, watching Lauren disappear behind a curtain. Daniel considered his answer carefully. Immediately, she's suspended from duty. She'll be escorted off the aircraft by management personnel when we land. There will be an investigation that includes reviewing all the evidence, interviewing witnesses, and examining her service record for patterns. If the investigation confirms what we've documented today, she'll likely be terminated. And then, Nia pressed, does she just get hired by another airline? Not easily. Daniel's response was measured. The industry maintains databases of terminated employees. Dismissal for discrimination gets flagged in ways that make rehiring unlikely, though not impossible. She'll face professional consequences that will follow her, but not legal ones. This observation came from a passenger who hadn't spoken yet. A Latina woman in row for wearing an expensive suit and the bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms. What happened here was discriminatory service delivery under the ADA, but it's extremely difficult to pursue criminal charges. At most, it's a civil matter, and even civil litigation is complicated by arbitration clauses in ticket contracts. She stood and approached Althea, extending a business card.
Nia Calder, Elena Vasquez.
I specialize in disability rights law. If you're interested in pursuing this beyond corporate apologies and policy promises, I'd be honored to represent you. Pro bono, if necessary, because I think your platform could help change not just Atlas's policies but industry-wide practices. Althea accepted the card, her fingers tracing the embossed text she couldn't read. I appreciate the offer, Ms. Vasquez, but I'm not sure I have the energy for a protracted legal battle. I've spent 6 years trying to rebuild my life. The thought of spending the next 2 years in depositions and courtrooms, reliving discrimination over and over, makes me want to hide in my house and never fly again. I understand. Elena's voice carried genuine empathy. But consider this. Your visibility makes you uniquely positioned to create change that benefits thousands of disabled passengers who don't have your resources or platform. Sometimes the fights we least want to take on are the ones we're most called to engage. Do you know that stories like this only create change when enough people refuse to look away? If you truly care about justice and not just the feeling of caring, you can subscribe and share this. Silence protects the wrong people. Nia's hand tightened around her mother's. You don't have to decide now, Mama. You don't have to decide at all. Whatever you choose, I'll support it. If you want to let this go after we land, we let it go. If you want to fight, we fight. But it's your choice, not mine. Not Ms. Vasquez's. Not anyone else's. The wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old, created another moment of collective pause among the adults. Here was a child teaching grown people about consent, agency, and the right to determine one's own path even in circumstances where others saw moral obligation or strategic opportunity. Althea pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. Nia's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. She taught me that courage looks different for different people. Sometimes it's fighting. Sometimes it's surviving. Sometimes it's just showing up when everything in you wants to disappear. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, reminding everyone that they were still suspended in air, still traveling toward destinations both literal and metaphorical. The captain's voice returned to announce their descent into Redwood would begin in 30 minutes. Daniel stood, his tablet clutched against his chest. Dr. Calder, I need to complete my report and coordinate with management for your arrival. But before I go, I want you to know something. My daughter is 7. She has cerebral palsy. Every public space we enter, I watch people make assumptions about her intelligence, her capabilities, her worth based solely on how her body moves through the world. His voice thickened with emotion. I've been working in this industry for 30 years, and I've told myself I was making it better, creating space for more inclusive practices. But watching your daughter defend your dignity while I was nowhere to be found forces me to confront how much I've accepted, how much I've normalized, how often I've prioritized keeping my job over challenging systems that harm people like my daughter. He met Althea's unseeing gaze with his own tear-filled eyes. So regardless of what you decide about legal action or public advocacy, I want to thank you. Thank you for flying today. Thank you for letting your daughter speak up. Thank you for being visible when visibility is exhausting. Because people like me need to be reminded that our comfort with broken systems makes us complicit in maintaining them. With that, he turned and moved toward the cockpit, his shoulders squared with new determination born from confronting uncomfortable truths. The cabin settled into a different kind of quiet, not the shocked silence of witnessing conflict, but the contemplative silence of people processing what they'd seen and what it meant. Morrison leaned across the aisle. Dr. Calder, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Morrison Logistics. We manage supply chain operations for 17 airlines, including Atlas. When we land, I'm going to be making some calls about our contracts and the diversity standards we require from our partners. What happened today can't be dismissed as an isolated incident if I have any say in the matter. I'm a journalist. The purple-haired woman from earlier spoke up. Freelance, but I write for several major outlets. This story needs to be told, but I won't write it without your permission. If you want privacy, I'll respect that. But if you want amplification, I can provide platform. One by one, passengers offered resources, connections, support. A doctor volunteered to document any health impacts from the stress of the incident. A social media manager offered to help control the narrative online. A minister offered spiritual counseling. A teacher offered to connect Nia with student advocacy groups. The offers were genuine but also overwhelming, each well-intentioned gesture adding weight to Althea's shoulders rather than lifting burden from them. Nia felt her mother's breathing shift, becoming shallower, faster. The physiological response to stress overload that she'd learned to recognize years ago. Thank you, everyone. Nia's voice cut through the barrage of offers with gentle firmness. But my mother needs some quiet time before we land. She has a major medical appointment tomorrow morning, and she needs to rest and center herself. If you want to help, the best thing you can do right now is give us space. The adults, properly chastened, settled back into their seats. Crystal gave Nia a subtle thumbs up from her row. Morrison nodded with respect. Elena tucked her business card into Althea's hand and retreated without another word. In the relative quiet that followed, Nia pulled a small pill organizer from her mother's carry-on bag and shook out 2 tablets. Your anxiety medication, Mama. You're due. Althea accepted the pills and the water bottle Nia handed her, taking them without argument. I don't know if I can do this, baby. All of it. The surgery, the attention, the expectation that I'll become some kind of activist when all I want is to see your face again. Then that's all you do. Nia's certainty was absolute. You go to your appointment tomorrow. You have your consultation. You decide about the surgery based on what's right for you, not what makes a good narrative for other people's purposes. Everything else can wait. But people are counting on me. No, Nia's interruption was gentle but unyielding. People are projecting their hopes onto you. That's different than you owing them anything. You don't owe the disabled community your trauma as entertainment. You don't owe other passengers your fight as their proxy. You don't owe anyone anything except yourself and me, and we're okay with whatever you choose. Althea's tears came freely now, the dam breaking after hours of holding everything together. I'm supposed to be the parent. I'm supposed to be teaching you these lessons, not learning them from you. Maybe we teach each other. Nia wiped her mother's tears with the sleeve of her dress, unconcerned about staining the fabric her grandmother had so carefully stitched. You taught me to speak up today. Now I'm teaching you that it's okay to rest. We're a team. Remember? We take turns being strong. The plane began its descent, the change in air pressure making ears pop throughout the cabin. Flight attendants moved through the aisles collecting trash and ensuring seats were upright and tray tables stowed. A different attendant, an older Asian woman with kind eyes, approached their row with visible apprehension. Dr. Calder, my name is Susan Chun. I'm the senior flight attendant for this aircraft. Her voice trembled slightly, carrying the weight of someone delivering an apology she knew was inadequate but necessary. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to express our deepest regret for what you experienced today. There is no excuse for the service you received, and I'm ashamed it happened under my watch. She placed a handwritten note on Althea's tray table. I've written down my direct contact information and employee number. If there's anything at all that I can do to begin making this right, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know words are insufficient, but they're all I have right now. Althea's fingers found the note, tracing the handwritten script she couldn't see. Ms. Chun, did you witness what happened? Susan's pause spoke volumes. I was working the aft galley. I heard raised voices but didn't investigate immediately. By the time I came forward, other crew members had already responded. I should have been more attentive. I should have noticed the uneven service delivery before it escalated to crisis. So you saw the pattern but didn't intervene until it became impossible to ignore. Althea's words weren't accusatory, just factual, but they landed with the force of judgment nonetheless. Yes, Susan's admission came with visible shame. I've worked with Lauren for 6 years. I've seen her service inconsistencies before but told myself I was misreading situations, that I was being oversensitive, that it wasn't my place to police another crew member's interactions. I chose professional courtesy over passenger protection, and I'm sorry. Nia studied Susan with the analytical gaze she'd inherited from her mother. What are you going to do differently next time? The question caught Susan off guard. She'd expected anger or dismissal, not this child's demand for concrete behavioral change. I'm going to trust my observations instead of second-guessing them. I'm going to speak up when I see unequal service, even if it makes me uncomfortable or unpopular with colleagues. And I'm going to advocate for crew accountability structures that don't rely on passengers having to fight for basic dignity. That's a start. Nia's assessment carried the authority of someone much older. But words are easy at 35,000 feet when everything's already broken. The real test comes on the next flight, in the next moment when it's easier to stay silent than speak up. Susan nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke. You're absolutely right. I hope you'll hold me accountable if our paths cross again. If you've ever stayed silent when you saw someone being mistreated, if you've ever looked away because getting involved felt too risky, this story should make you uncomfortable. You can subscribe to our channel. We create more stories that'll make you never forget what courage really costs. The plane touched down with barely a bump, Captain Rodriguez's skill evident in the smooth landing. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Daniel's voice came over the intercom one final time. Dr. Calder and her daughter will be deplaning first. I'm asking all other passengers to please remain seated until they've exited. Thank you for your cooperation and for being witnesses to an incident that should never have happened but did. And that will result in meaningful change if I have any say in the matter. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, Daniel appeared from the cockpit accompanied by Captain Rodriguez herself, a Latina woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and the bearing of someone who'd broken numerous barriers to reach her position. She moved directly to Althea's seat and crouched in the aisle. Dr. Calder, I'm Captain Maria Rodriguez. I wanted to personally apologize and tell you that I'll be filing a supplementary report to Daniel's documentation. I take full responsibility for the culture on my aircraft, and what happened today reflects failures in leadership, training, and oversight that begin with me. Althea reached out, her hand finding Maria's shoulder with gentle accuracy. Captain Rodriguez, systems fail because we build them to fail. One captain can't fix that, but one captain acknowledging failure instead of defending it, that's how change begins. Maria's eyes glistened. When I started flying 30 years ago, there were almost no women of color in cockpits. People like you fought to create the policies that made space for people like me. The least I can do is fight to protect the policies you created from being ignored by people who never had to fight for their space. The two women held each other's gaze, Althea's unseeing eyes meeting Maria's sighted ones in a moment of connection that transcended words. Then Maria stood, offering her hand to help Althea rise. Nia gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency, slinging her mother's bag over her shoulder alongside her own. As they moved toward the exit, every passenger in first class stood. Not applauding, not cheering, just standing in silent witness and respect. Morrison nodded as they passed. Crystal-mouthed, "Stay strong." Elena held up her business card, a reminder that the offer remained open. The elderly couple from row 5, who hadn't spoken during the incident, pressed a note into Nia's hand as she walked by. The jetway was empty except for 3 people waiting at the gate. 2 Atlas Air executives in corporate suits and a woman in a white doctor's coat. The executives approached with rehearsed apologies and promises of follow-up, but Althea walked past them toward the woman in the coat. "Dr. Patel?" Althea's voice carried hope and fear in equal measure. "Yes, it's me." The surgeon's voice was warm, tinged with concern. "I heard about your flight through some industry contacts who saw the video. Are you okay? Do you need to reschedule tomorrow's consultation?" Althea stood very still, processing the question and everything it implied. She'd fought so hard to get to this appointment, maintained strict protocols for 8 months, organized her entire life around this one chance to potentially regain her sight. The thought of delaying because of what happened on the plane felt like letting discrimination win twice, once in the moment and again in the aftermath. But she was also exhausted, emotionally depleted, her body flooded with stress hormones that could affect the imaging tests scheduled for tomorrow. The ethical thing to do was postpone until she was physically and emotionally stable. The defiant thing to do was push forward regardless of cost. "Mama." Nia's hand found hers. "What do you need? Not what should you do, not what makes sense strategically. What do you actually need right now?" Althea's face crumpled. "I need to not be making decisions. I need to not be brave or strong or strategic. I need to just exist for a few hours without calculating the consequences of every choice." Dr. Patel stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Then here's what we're going to do. I'm taking you both to your hotel. You're going to rest, eat something that isn't airplane food, and sleep. Tomorrow morning, we'll do a basic assessment to see if you're physically ready for the full imaging protocol. If you are, we proceed. If you're not, we reschedule with no judgment and no pressure. The surgery window isn't closing tomorrow. You have time." "But I've waited so long." Althea's voice broke. 6 years of being blind, of missing my daughter's life, of being treated like I'm invisible. I just want to see again. I just want this to be over." "I know." Dr. Patel's hand rested on Althea's arm. "But pushing through when your body isn't ready could compromise the outcome we're both hoping for. Sometimes courage looks like patience rather than persistence." Nia tugged her mother toward the exit. "Come on, Mama. Dr. Patel is right. We've got time. Let's go rest." As they walked through the terminal, Nia noticed people staring, some with recognition from the viral video, others simply responding to the sight of a blind woman being guided by a child. She met their gazes steadily, her chin up, her hands secure in her mother's, refusing to let anyone's curiosity or judgment make them shrink. By the time they reached the hotel that evening, the video had been viewed 7 million times. News outlets were requesting interviews. Disability advocacy organizations were praising Nia's courage. Atlas Air had released a formal statement promising immediate policy reviews. Lauren Beckett's name was trending on social media, her life being dissected by strangers who'd never met her but had strong opinions about who she was based on 4 minutes of video. But in a quiet hotel room in Redwood, none of that mattered. Althea lay in bed, her daughter curled beside her, both of them exhausted by the day's events. Nia's bracelet, her father's bracelet, caught the lamplight, the silver gleaming like a promise kept. "Daddy would be proud of you today," Althea whispered into the darkness. If you love this video, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification for instant notification on our next story. "He'd be proud of both of us," Nia corrected. "You showed up even though it was hard. I spoke up because you taught me how." We're continuing his legacy together. Outside, the world was already moving on to the next viral outrage, the next moment of captured injustice, the next story that would briefly illuminate systemic problems before fading into the endless scroll. But the changes set in motion at 35,000 feet would ripple outward in ways large and small, affecting training protocols and policy decisions and individual moments when crew members chose courage over comfort. Sometimes justice arrives with fanfare and cameras. Sometimes it arrives in quiet hotel rooms where exhausted people hold each other and decide that surviving with dignity intact is victory enough. And sometimes, just sometimes, it arrives in the fierce love between a mother and daughter who refuse to let the world make them smaller than they are, who stand together in airplane aisles and demand the basic respect that should never have required demanding in the first place. The next morning, Althea's imaging showed she was physically ready. 3 months later, she underwent the surgery. 6 months after that, her vision began to return in fragments, light and shadow giving way to shapes and colors. The first face she saw clearly was Nia's. 9 years old and getting older, still fierce, still brave, still teaching her mother that strength comes in forms we don't always recognize until we desperately need them.